first Grand Prix of 2025 is in the books, and if you're Marc Marquez, pretty much flawless. And if you're Alex Marquez too, actually, it's been a really good weekend for the Marquezes. Pecco Bagnaia in third, joined by Pete McLaren and Lewis Duncan. We're here to dissect the weekend in Thailand. Lewis, it was like a flashback to 2019 almost, wasn't it, with Marquez? It was frightening, wasn't it? Pretty much all weekend.
Yeah, it was. It went to script, didn't it? This is what we said all winter, and Mark's kind of tried to downplay it. Oh, Peck will be faster. He's the rival. Nobody really believed him, and from the off on Friday, the pace was there. The race pace was there. Saturday sprint, nobody could touch him. It didn't quite go to plan. Of course, we'll talk about a bit more. But in the Grand Prix, there was the tire pressure issue. But even then, the presence of mind and the confidence levels he had to kind of understand the situation, drop behind Alex Marquez, just follow him, not make any mistakes, just ensure he doesn't have a penalty. And as soon as he got ahead of him, was 1.7 seconds up the road after 3 laps. I mean, I think we all expected this, but I think we come away from Thailand. I think a lot of people are going to be way more worried about what we've just seen than maybe otherwise. Because typically, we get to the first round of the season, the test's been there, everything's a bit closer. I think there was maybe a bit of a school of thought that maybe be Marquez versus Marquez, Peck will be up there. There'll be all these, it'll be a bit more of a free for all, and it really wasn't. It looked like towards the end of a season rather than right at the start of the season, and we have to also remember that this is a GP25 that isn't really fully 25'd yet. Let's
true.
say it's got a few 25 parts on it. It doesn't have the new chassis. It doesn't have the new aero. In theory, that they know that those parts weren't good enough to begin with, and they can refine them and introduce them a bit later on. That bike will only get better. And Marquez just doesn't look like he can be knocked off his stride right now. He's just really extreme conditions this weekend, which generally play into his hands a little bit, but this has never been a brilliant circuit for him either over the years. He's freely admitted that, and just all these things have aligned, and you look at it now and you're even more certain that what we've predicted in the preseason is going to come true.
Absolutely. Do you know what? When I watch practice and you see the full TV broadcast, and and you were like, they followed him for one lap, and I was watching him and I went, jeez, he looks a lot more different than he did on that Gresini Ducati last year. The mindset and the just confidence, the ease it looked at for all weekends. I couldn't believe how naturally it was coming to him. And when you see the GP24 of his brother up there, and we'll get into that more after this, but he just looked like he had another, I don't know how many temps on everyone else. It was frightening. And when you see his teammate Pecco finishing third, and qualifying and sprinting in the Grand Prix, he didn't have any answers at all for him. And getting beat by a GP24 and Alex Marquez as well, which, I don't know, Pete, what do you make of that? I think that came out as a surprise as well, just how competitive Alex Marquez is as well at this early part of the season. It shows that, Mark has his brother as his closest rival at the minute.
He does, and I think that's something else that just plays into Mark's hands also. I think if there's anyone that he'd like to be fighting with, as we saw in the race, he's got confidence. He knows riding with his brother. He's been doing it all of his life, hasn't he? So, and as we saw, the sort of casual look over his shoulder lets him ahead to do the tyre pressure. And really, as you're saying, John, I mean, we never really saw Mark pushing the limits at all with the bike, did we? I think there was one moment, maybe Saturday morning free practice, got a bit of a leg off, and I think he said he was trying a bit of a different setup to try and find even more speed, and then he realized, what, we don't need to do this. We don't need to push the limits here, and it just emphasizes the advantages that he had around here, as you guys have been saying. And as Pecco put it, what did he say? Mark was playing with us. He that's how he saw it, and that's how I think a lot of people saw it. That Mark had a lot in hand and was just riding. He was winning. He was riding to the pace needed to win, wasn't he? And that's it. And whatever was needed, he could find it. When he wanted to overtake Alex, away he went. But as you say, let's not take anything away from Alex either. To come away from the season opener with a pair of second places, second in the championship, great result. Beating Pecco, all that kind of thing. The GP24 point you bring up, that's an interesting one as well. Fabio Di Gianantonio has been quite good on that this evening, just talking in the corner behind me a few hours ago, and he said, "Look, this is a completely different bike compared to the GP23." He said, "When I was riding the 23 last year, they were saying, people were telling me it's a few little improvements." He said, "It's complete, it just does everything so much better." And I think that's what we're seeing. I suppose on the good side of things, if you take Mark out the equation, we have got this quite even fight between the satellite Ducatis now. Morbidelli up there as well, as we saw, and things like that. So, Morbidelli, Alex Marquez, Bagnaia, they'll be keeping everyone on their toes. But really, Mark just looks a step ahead of everybody at the moment, doesn't
he? Yeah, it's frightening, to be honest. I think with Marquez, I always find, Lewis, you don't know what his pace truly is, because sometimes he can just mask things. And he said today he hasn't felt this good on a bike since Jerez 2020. Obviously, we know what happened there, but before that, the way he was cutting through the pack was, I've never seen anything like it in my life in MotoGP, in modern era. If he's feeling like that, what's possible this season, really, for Marquez?
Yes, it was an interesting comment I thought he made there. I think we've all been looking at 2019. That kind of year is maybe a reference, and to hear Mark say that was, I think it says a lot about kind of where he's at in his head now as well. Is that I think for the last few years we've seen a rider that's been very reserved about what his potential is after the injury, and he's never really spoken about 2020 as being like a year that he could have really, really, kicked on. Obviously, we saw what he was capable of in that race before he crashed. And, he did say before that he could have fought for the championship in 2022 if he had the 2021 bike. But, to hear that kind of a comment, and then, like you say, Jordan, remembering what he did in that race, that, again, is another thing that really should, scare some of his rivals, because that was a rider in that race that was at the back of the grid and was on course to win it, for just a few laps from the end. So if that's the kind of mindset he's in, and that's the form he's feeling on a bike that is infinitely better than that Honda ever was, from everything, from speed, from rider friendliness, from everything. You look at the rivals and you think, how can they possibly even remotely think about getting on terms with him? I think the fact that Pecco Bagnaia started this weekend on the back foot has maybe exaggerated the gap between them a little bit. If you actually look at the practice kind of analysis between the two of them after Friday, there was under 2/10 between them in terms of pace, which still works out a few seconds over the course of a Grand Prix, but in theory, Pecco should have been a lot closer to him than he ended up being in both the sprint and the Grand Prix. Pecco spoke about the sprint fuel tank being an issue for him, and it's always been an issue for him, but that's not an excuse anymore. It was fine maybe last year, the year before, when there was this quite dramatic swing between Saturdays and Sundays between himself and Jorge Martin. That's not a thing you can rely on anymore, because Marquez was fine on that bike, and he was fine on the bike again on Sunday. To be that far off straight away as well, it wasn't as if this was a gradual drop. He was a second behind second place after just 3 or 4 laps in the Grand Prix on Sunday, which that's a massive mountain to climb to get ahead of Alex Marquez, let alone then bridge that gap to his teammate. And we're coming up to these circuits that are just great for Marquez. You just look at everything and you think, how can anyone possibly start bridging the gap? I think it is worse than we maybe all sort of realised in the winter anyway and thought it could be. I think the challenge facing everyone is a lot harder. And yeah, I mean, Pecco really needed to... I didn't come to Thailand thinking Pecco could win this race. He needed to just be in the ballpark. He needed to maybe just put Mark under a bit of pressure. If he was second, be reasonably close to him. And I think that would have been a good way to start things. If he starts even further back than what we really thought was possible, and that's where the real concern will be, I think.
Yeah. Do you know what? This isn't... Marc Marquez is a freak, right? This is the thing. He's not normal. Like, he literally is a rider who... We hear the term alien. He is the last of the aliens. And at that weekend that he put together was just alien. Like, it's no disrespect to any other rider on the grid. They just... When he's in that form, you can't get near him. It's he plays with people, as Bagnaia said. He can just control things. And when you put him on the best machine, which, as we've seen, people thought Ducati were standing still over the winter and selecting that 24 package, whatever, and that 25 setup. They're not being caught this year unless there's a dramatic drop-off, which there isn't going to be. It's frightening what he's doing. As you say, next 2 rounds, Argentina and Texas. I mean, the last time he was in Argentina was 2019, and he had a 2.1 second lead after 2 laps or something like that. Ridiculous. When he's in that mood and he wants to just go, and people say he wants to play for the show, he'll wait behind people. Not this year when he's on the best bike. He wants to let everyone know on the grid who the man is, essentially. I know it's the first round, people say you're maybe getting carried away, but when you see that, it's just scary. And I suppose we can look at second place, Alex Marquez, and a fun stat. First time 2 brothers have finished first and second in Grand Prix history. And I believe it's the first time that 2 brothers are first and second in the championship as well, for the first time ever, which is pretty remarkable when you think about it. He was really impressive over the weekend, wasn't he, Pete? Just for how his pre-season has went and how his not expectation for the year has gone, because he kind of played himself down a little bit, saying it'd be good to get a few podiums, but he was keeping his brother honest at points in the sprint. And yeah, today he kind of felt the pressure from his brother being right behind him, and he knew what was kind of coming. He kind of touched on that in the press conference. But to beat Pecco Bagnaia on the GP24, that's really impressive from Alex Marquez, isn't it?
It is, yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you say, in testing he's been fast, but it's always testing's testing, racing is racing, isn't it? So we're all waiting to see, can you deliver when it really counts? And Alex did all weekend. Okay, Mark was a step ahead, but Alex put together a really great weekend. And so I say, I think that also plays into Mark's hands. If there's anyone that Mark wants between himself and Pecco, I think it's his own brother, isn't it? And so to have him up there, if this repeats itself again, and Pecco is not even, let's say, a safe second place when Mark is out of reach, but now has to actually fight pretty hard to try and beat Alex, Franco Morbidelli. I mean, it's just adding to the difficulties for Pecco of sort of starting behind as things have gone in round 1. I mean, he's going to really need to respond pretty quickly, isn't he? And as you guys have said, the next 2 tracks, on paper, very good for Mark. So, Alex, I think we've tipped him to sort of win races this year, and there'll probably be an opportunity. You've got to imagine, there'll be some times where Mark isn't dominating, but then again, I mean, I'll hold my hands up, wasn't I? I said I didn't think we'd see Mark dominating the way they did in 2019. I didn't think we'd see him, looking at the number of race wins and all that kind of thing. I thought we'd see a complete Mark, but who knows? If he carries on like this, then maybe those win records will be going as well. But let's see. It's interesting, isn't it? Though it's so important for Mark coming into the team as a new rider. Coming into the team, as he said, a team where there's a double world champion alongside him who's brought so much to Ducati, isn't he, Pecco? Mm-hmm. And already after this weekend, you see the debriefs and all the engineers and which side of the garage do they go to and everything else. People always support the guy who's going to give them the best results, don't they? And it's a big weekend for Mark, even off the track, if you count that sort of side of things. Settling into a brand new team like that against a pretty fierce adversary in Bagnaia, let's face it. And let's see where they go from here. But I think Alex Marquez, perfect situation for him. No pressure. Nobody expects him to win the championship. Perfect. Almost a Jorge Martin situation, isn't it?
Yeah,
he's got to remember that. He's got to not let that get to him, not let this good result, play on his mind. Just enjoy it. Just go out there, enjoy being a satellite rider on a fantastic bike.
Yeah. Pete, one more question for you about the Factory Ducati team. You spoke to Pecco and Mark. You've been to the debriefs. What was the sort of energy like between the two? Like, so comparing Mark to Pecco, how was Pecco's demeanor when you're speaking to him compared to Mark's, for example, over the weekend?
I'd say Mark just looked really relaxed. Perhaps the most relaxed that I've seen him, let's say. Well, the way it works, they all come into the media room, and sometimes they have to queue up. They have to wait for the other riders that are scheduled to speak before them. And so, you're milling around a bit. And some riders love that. They go and chat. Jack Miller, for example, will go and chat to another rider and whatever else. Other riders keep themselves to themselves, and Mark can be quite, he's quite like that sometimes. He'll sort of just stay in with talk to his press officer or his assistant, something like that. But he's been very sort of just looking really relaxed and comfortable the whole time. So he's as comfortable off the track as he is on the track. And Pecco, to be honest, he's been no big change with Pecco. Very calm. We know how he is. He doesn't get into a big panic. So I don't think there's been any big changes in either of them really. But certainly Mark, very relaxed. Pecco has been saying that he knows he's got a lot of work to do, a lot of catching up from the testing, isn't it? He still felt there was a few things he wanted to sort of sort out, that kind of thing. But yeah, he's got to find some pace and put some pressure on Mark now, hasn't he? And that's I think, as you guys have said as well, we didn't think there would be this clear sort of gap at the first round, and I think that's caught quite a lot of people by surprise. But let's face it, rewind, was it just under a year ago? Gigi Dall'Igna saw something in the data, didn't he? That signed Mark before he'd won any races. And, now maybe we're seeing on track what Gigi saw, let's say, in private behind the computer screens, maybe maybe a year ago.
That's a great point, Pete. Yeah, what do you make of the comment from Marquez in Parc Fermé, I think it was, or maybe the press conference? He said he feels like the Ducati team have known him for almost 10 years, that side of the team that he's working in, which, I mean, they've only been together like 4 months, really, when you think about it. He loves an atmosphere of building that family, doesn't he? And if he's got that straight away in the factory setup, I mean, Marco Rigamonti he was so happy every time the cameras cut to him throughout the weekend. That whole side of the team, they were really happy with how things went. It's a worrying sign, isn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting as well because it's essentially he's stepping into kind of enemy territory. Those have been the enemy for years and years, for the last 10 years, really. And I think there was maybe this kind of wonder as well that when Mark was signed to the factory team and he wasn't allowed to kind of take Frankie Carcetti with him, and then there also wasn't any real possibility for Santi Hernandez to come with him, which, when we think back to when he signed for Gresini, the only reason that Hernandez didn't come along with him was because Mark refused to sign a 2-year deal. So they didn't want those secrets potentially going somewhere else if Mark walked away. I think there was maybe just a little kind of thoughts. Okay, Mark's coming into this team, but how's that going to work with Gigi as well? He's a very, very proud engineer, and doesn't want his sort of efforts and the team's efforts to be masked or to be overshadowed by a rider's kind of ability. Which when Marquez comes onto a bike, that's what's going to happen. Is he's going to be the one who's branded the winner rather than the bike. But I think we saw this in Barcelona, in the test, just very quickly. We saw Mark and Gigi sat with each other and having a laugh, and with Tardozzi as well, and it seemed quite a relaxed atmosphere from that point as well. And I think Ducati just knows they've got something really special on their hands. They know that they've got. This is kind of really. This is the end game. This is Gigi's end game from when he came to the mark in 2014. Ducati was at its lowest ebb, and he slowly built it up and built it up and built it up to the point where, they obviously could win races and win championships. But the ultimate goal, I think, for any manufacturer is to be able to have the best rider on the grid at that time winning a championship. They tried it with Rossi, 12 years ago. It didn't work. They haven't really had an opportunity to do that again. That's not a criticism of Bagnaia or Jorge Martin, for example. Those are riders that came through the system. Those are young riders. That's not the same kind of thing, really. They've managed to get the best rider of the generation, maybe of all time, if that's a debate you want to have. And already it's bearing fruit, and it will probably go to a point where Mark will at least fight for these world championships, if not win them. That's the end game, and I think that's why it's just been such a relaxed thing, because all that hard work is now, they've got the wins, they've got the championships, but now they have a real opportunity to really kind of become legend, essentially, in MotoGP. It's one thing to win championships with Francesco Bagnaia, it's another thing to win a championship with Marc Marquez. And I think that's why it's such a a harmonious atmosphere, because look at the position they're in,
Yeah.
compared to 10 years and compared to their rivals. There's a lot of great riders out there, but they've got the best bike, they've got the best rider. That's a combination that doesn't really happen very often. We haven't really seen that very, very much throughout this MotoGP era. I mean, you could probably count on one hand when that has happened. Rossi at Honda, for example.
Yeah.
Even when Rossi went to Yamaha, you couldn't really say the Yamaha was the best bike, because between 2004 and 2007, he was the only one winning on that bike. Stoner at Ducati's the same thing. That wasn't a great bike. Stoner was just a great rider, and the Honda as well, I guess, wasn't the best bike in 2011, arguably. But Casey made, and obviously all those years that Mark was on the Honda, that wasn't the best bike, but they had the best rider. To have that combination of best bike and best rider is so rare, and Ducati have earned that. No, that's they've not stumbled across it; they've earned it, and I think this is why the atmosphere is like this, because if you're a team boss, team owner, why would you not want this situation?
Yeah, do you know what? I hate making F1 comparisons, but it reminds me, it's recent, but Max Verstappen for those 2 years, maybe two years ago, when the Red Bull was clear of everything else, and he just dominated everybody. It kind of has that when you put the best driver at that moment into the best car, and you see what happens. It's maybe not great for everyone else watching, because they want to see someone challenge, but we talked about it in our last podcast about witnessing greatness almost, and how it can drive a sport and that narrative. We're seeing it here right now, and it's a great story, because obviously we talked about it 5 years on from the incident, the comeback story. It's the perfect start to that the season, really, that can kind of not close the book on the chapter of that, but it can just complete that comeback story almost, which I think is it's special, Lewis.
Yeah, I do as well, and just on that as well, and I think what's even more interesting about this is that the one thing that Mark said today in the TV debriefs was that if I win the championship, great. If it doesn't happen, it's not going to change my life. I've achieved everything already. This is about enjoying, and he said it in the press conference about when he was asked about his brother. This is all about enjoying, our parents gave us bikes to enjoy, not for, it wasn't an investment. It was purely about enjoying going racing. That's when Mark's at his absolute best, is when it is an enjoyment. And I think we spoke about this a few weeks ago, Jordan, just this mindset shift of everything he's gone through. He knows now he's at the point of his career where time's a blessing.
Yeah.
It can very easily be snatched away from you. And just when you enjoy something, it's just better. It doesn't matter if you're winning or losing or whatever. If you're just enjoying what you're doing, if life's good, then life's good. And I think everyone can relate to that. And I think that'll feed into that narrative over the year if Marquez continues to win and he's enjoying it. Is people love winners, but they love people who are just loving life, because when things are good, everything's good. Nothing can bring you down, and everyone can relate to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the shots of the weekend, well, maybe the shot of the weekend, was him and Alex going down pit lane, and they're holding hands essentially going down. I mean, it's really cool, to be honest. Like, what other sport could you see two brothers at the top, like, racing against each other, but being genuinely happy when one person wins and the other second? I think, yeah, imagine if that continues for a few races. I imagine Alex will want to get one over on him, because he's like, oh, well, it's nice that you're winning, but I want to win one too, sort of thing. I think it's incredible, the atmosphere they've built with each other. And that year, Grassini together, obviously didn't get the year together at Honda because of Mark's injury. But I think it's so cool seeing two brothers. And yeah, I think the atmosphere that Marquez has built already inside Ducati is something pretty special, to be honest. I think they really believe in him truly now as not the guy that lead them, but he's the figurehead, isn't he? He's the best on the grid. He's the most successful on the grid. He's the guy that they're pinning their hopes on. I don't mean that disrespectfully to Bagnaia, but I'd love to see Bagnaia fight back from this, because I do think, to his credit, he did take his medicine pretty well this weekend and not throwing it away. As he said, he's learned that third places are okay, because obviously we've seen last year mistakes happen for him, and he said there was points during the race where he wasn't really comfortable at the front and it was a struggle, but he got through the struggle. And I think if you bank points, It's a bit like that Johnny Ray sort of Alvaro Bautista thing, isn't it? You just keep getting second, and maybe it'll pay off. For Bagnaia, this could pay off if he just keeps finishing behind Marc. But having Alex in there, like I said, that's another thing to overcome because he's on the complete package that he can already just go into every Grand Prix with a set of data and they go, this is what we need to do, bang, and he can go out and do his laps. So yeah. Park the podium chat. Ogura, Pete, you tipped him as your rookie of the year, and me and Lewis went for Fermin Aldeguer. Ogura is how can I say, maybe the best rookie performance since Marc Marquez in 2013. A P5 in qualifying, P4 in the sprint, a P5 again today in the Grand Prix. And he looks so chilled out about it. He looks like everything comes so easy to him, which is pretty remarkable, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I'll be honest, I had no idea he was going to do this when I tipped him for Rookie of the Year. But and I think surprise of the weekend, really, isn't it? I mean, fantastic. Just as you say, not just. You can always get a situation where you get a tow in qualifying, you get a good lap, you're suddenly up there on the grid or something. But to do 2 races the way that he did, you know, behind Bagnaia and then fighting with the top non-Ducati, wasn't he, today in the Grand Prix as well? I mean, to do that in your first race, incredible. And he's just so calm with it, as you say. You know, he said, yeah, I sat behind Bagnaia and I just copied him. I just learned from what he was doing. I mean, just that whole thing, even though, you know, just sitting behind someone, and actually also with Marc in the race, behind someone in this heat, all the riders were saying it's bad anyway. But when you're following somebody, it's like twice as bad. Your hand burns when you touch the brake lever because it's so hot and everything else. And he spent 2 races behind people. We know the problems with overheating front tires that you get. His teammate Raul Fernandez retired with an overheating front tire, didn't he? So it is, you know, the RSGP is still susceptible to that kind of thing. Handled it all, didn't he? And just took it all in his stride, really laid back. Fantastic, I think. You know, there were a lot of people that questioned the signing of Ogura, weren't there, to Trackhouse? You know, a lot of people wanted to see Joe Roberts get that ride and everything else. Brivio, he took a fair bit of stick, I think we could say, from some areas. Well, you know, after that, this whole weekend, I was going to say performance, but it wasn't. It was the whole weekend that he's put together. Let's see where he goes from here. But yeah, absolute brilliant weekend for him.
That's what you make of Ogura. I couldn't believe the sprint, to be honest, when he kind of said after he hit the brakes at turn 1 on the first lap, and he just went right around the outside of Jack Miller and Frankie Morbidelli like it was nothing. It was so cool to see him follow Bagnaia and just stick with him, because even Bagnaia was kind of saying after, it was incredible. Like, even just for what he was doing as a rookie. I don't think people really understand how impressive it really is, especially on an inferior bike, being the Aprilia, and it being Buriram, where they're susceptible to heat issues, and when it's really that hot, and I think it's so good.
Yeah, those heat issues seem to kind of be cured, actually. Marco Bezzecchi said it was fine. Like, he was expecting worse, and you know, it was hot, but it wasn't bad. And I think that's obviously Ogura's proved that. Although, I mean, Ogura could probably literally be on fire, and he
wouldn't know.
I wouldn't really be bothered by it. It's interesting because this has typically never really been that great a track for the Aprilia, and testing was good, but as Pete mentioned earlier, testing is testing. You know, you maybe kind of expect a bit of a reality check when you get to the races, but I think you know, Ogura's yes, there has been this stick that Trackhouse kind of came in for when he emerged as getting that seat over Joe Roberts. But when I spoke to Davide Brivio last year, he was like, we saw something in his riding that will suit well to MotoGP, and I kind of tried to push him on that a little bit, and he wouldn't really give away anything. He just said, you know, his riding style, the way he rides the bike, will just suit a MotoGP bike. And you know, Davide Brivio has got a keen eye for talent, so you know, he clearly something, whatever it is with his riding style, that just works, especially with that Aprilia. I mean, the Aprilia is one of the more rider-friendly bikes on the grid. It's more, you know, agile. It's not, you know, it's got a really, really good front end, and clearly that's where I probably feels he's most comfortable. We saw the way he was charging into corners, the way he was throwing it into corners. Clearly, he's got very, very good front end sense. but the consistency was the most impressive. You look at Pedro Acosta's Qatar Grand Prix last year, and the speed was unquestionable, but obviously he faded in both races because he absolutely ripped up the tyres.
Yeah.
You know, you think back to Marquez, for example, in Qatar, like that, the consistency was there. I'm not comparing, obviously, they're two different prospects altogether, but just to be able to remain there, to look after the tyres, to have that consistency, that's the more impressive thing rather than the result. Like if he was 8th, for example, but he was consistently, the pace was there, he hadn't fallen back to, he was just 8th and running that, and he was consistent, that would have been impressive as well. And I think that's something that Aprilia can really hold on to there, and Trackhouse can really hold on to, is this is not only someone that's got speed, it's someone that clearly understands already how to manage tyres, how to manage fuel, how to actually understand the races, which is something, there will be mistakes, there will be times where he'll go over the limit, that's all part of the learning process, but they start from such a high base already with Ogura, is you wonder what comes next. We go to Argentina, which has always been a good circuit for Aprilia. And nobody was there last year, so like it's not as if there's not relevant data really, because the bikes are now 2 years advanced, and it's almost a bit of a level playing field. So you're looking at this as being someone where they've clearly got good feeling for the bike, good feeling for the tires. Is this, could he sneak further into that top 5? Can he maybe challenge for the podium? It's not out with the realms of possibility at this point.
It's ridiculous, because you think someone who's so not underlooked by everybody, like you both said, the stick that kind of Trackhouse came under for signing him, I've always been kind of a fan of him, because from his Moto 3 and his Moto 2 days, and just something about his riding style, he just seems to be naturally suited to a MotoGP bike. And he talked about the weight of a Moto 2 bike compared to a MotoGP bike, where he's saying actually the MotoGP bike's actually lighter, essentially. It allows them to do more. And like, see, when you give someone that confidence that they can do what they want, I don't think it really matters if they've got talent or not, if they're a rookie or not even. It's when someone's got that confidence that he had to be top Aprilia in his first weekend. Yes, there's new riders on the Aprilia with Fizeki, but it's not factory Aprilia, and there's a bit more expectation there. For Ogura to be the top guy at Aprilia, and I imagine Jorge Martin sitting at home is going, you know what? That looks pretty good, that bike. I wouldn't mind getting on that when I come back. It's going to be okay, because if a rookie's proven it, and his teammate's proven it too, Aprilia are in a good spot, and I think they've been a great signing with Ogura being on their ranks, because it's good for our sport, I think, having someone, especially Japanese, he has a massive following as well. Everyone on social media was very happy that he was doing so well, and it's really nice to see that. And it only grows the sport, doesn't it, around the world? You've got sort of different cultures and different nationalities. So, Ogura, probably behind Marc Marquez and Alex Marquez for, I actually can't even decide who goes in the order for Rider of the Weekend, but he's definitely up there, so he is. And I suppose you can look at the other side. KTM, you kind of had them 5th, Lewis, on your pre-season prediction where they lined up. And you know what? It's a bit of a mess there, I think, because the best KTM was Brad Binder in 8th place in the Grand Prix. Pedro Acosta crashed out. We've seen that a lot last year happening. Marc Vinales nowhere. And Ev Ashni, to his credit, had a better Grand Prix than he did sprint. But it's a real worry at the minute, isn't it, for KTM? There's no direction there, it seems. They're in that real rut with that rear tire still.
Yeah, the phrase that Pedro Acosta used was, it's a disaster situation, I think is what he said, is they just don't understand why the rear tire chews itself up with that. The thing he also said as well is his crash was because the rear unloaded way easier than the old bike used to do. And obviously you remember last year, and he was defying physics by the way he was breaking into corners. Now that's what ultimately caught him out. So KTM, we see this too often, I think, from KTM. You look over the past sort of 4 or 5 years, as they come into the winter, they bring a bike to, the Misano test and then the Barcelona test, and it looks like a genuine step forward. It looks good. All the comments about it are really positive. It's much better than last year. It fixes all the little issues they had before. And then it gets to the new season, and something something happens. Either they don't develop the bike in the right direction, or they just don't develop the bike at all. It then gets to other circuits, different grip conditions, and all of a sudden, it does this, it does that. This is a problem. This is a problem. And we're seeing it again. Pedro Acosta spent the entire winter going, "This is great. This is the best pre-season I've had. This bike's definitely better." And you look at ultimately where they all are. They're all got. Maverick Vinales says they're all making more or less the same complaints, but Binder and Acosta are more. They've kind of assimilated the problems into their riding style, so they can kind of get around it. That I don't think that's a good thing. You can't just mask problems because you've gotten used to them.
It's the Honda thing, isn't it, with Mark? Almost.
Well, yeah, exactly. But I think it's probably worse because if you just get used to a problem, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to go faster. It just means you understand how to sort of predict it.
Yeah.
And if that's kind of the way that development's going, and they're just the comments are, "Well, this isn't bad anymore because I've gotten used to it." Well, it's the problem's still there. It's just you it doesn't bother you anymore. It's it's like when you hurt yourself, you hurt your leg's sore for a few days, and then you kind of the pain's still there, but you just get used to it. It doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't still fundamentally a problem, and then you don't know there's a problem until you go out for a run next time and cramp up your leg again. You see what I mean? It's the same thing. And I think KTM are lost. I think they're totally and utterly lost. I think Pedro Acosta can probably ride around these problems to an extent, but probably not as much as he could last year, judging by what we saw in the Grand Prix. Even in the sprint, he was, 11, 12 seconds off the race win?
Yeah.
This was a guy we were expecting to be fighting for the podium.
Yeah. Pete, what's your take on it? It's I think it's interesting when you compare Jack Miller's comments, for example, from going from the KTM to Yamaha. That's really interesting, isn't it? When Miller speaks about the Yamaha's instant feeling with the rear tire, and it's not doing what it done last year for him. He's a completely different rider, isn't he? Almost.
That's it. Yeah. Jack was saying that he's had zero chatter, which having spent, I think to use his words, I can't remember exactly, but he said, with the rear tire trying to shake itself off the bike all of last year was sort of how he described the problems, in which we saw, didn't we? Caught on camera. I think it was Motegi, wasn't it? Where we saw that crazy amount of chatter. So he said, now it's just I ride the bike, just big smile on my face every time I get off it, even if I fall off it, because he said I know why things are happening. And he said it's totally different now for him on the Yamaha. He doesn't have these chattering issues. Chatter is still a thing across quite a few manufacturers. It's just the riders don't really bring it up unless they're sort of prodded and pushed a little bit. But certainly, Jack was asked directly, and he did a zero with his hand. He said this much chatter. So he was very clear about the fact that he doesn't experience it on the Yamaha, and he's just so grateful to not have to deal with that problem. Just another thing on the KTMs, I think that the Tech 12 bikes, they don't have the big box at the back, do they? Whatever's in there, whether it's the mass damper thing or whether it's just moving electronics and other parts of the bike around, whatever it is, they are different to the factory bikes, aren't they? Which is it's sort of a bit unusual, because we were led to believe that there'd been 4 factory riders, weren't they? And they'd all have the same spec and everything else. And those boxes have been on the back of the factory team bikes since, the Sepang shakedown, where Danny Pedrosa and Paul Espargaro rode the bikes of Acosta and Binder, and then they literally took over those same bikes. The Tech 12 guys have tried that with that rear seat unit on there. They're cagey about what exactly it does, but Acosta says it does make the bike feel a bit better. And yet that still hasn't got over to the other guys at Tech 12. So it won't obviously transform their fortunes, because as you guys have just been explaining, Binder and Acosta obviously are having tough times themselves, but it's something that will it seems, help a bit, and they haven't got it yet. And I think to be starting the year already on a visibly different spec of bike, it's that in itself is going to be a bit of a sort of make you question a little bit. Well, how are we going to move forward when we haven't even got the same spec as the factory guys yet at round 1? So where do they go from here? The improvement from Bastianini is, as you said, it's come from his ability to save the tires, isn't it? That's what's transformed it. It wasn't, when he came to speak to the media, it's like, well, this is either going to go one or two ways. He's either going to say we made a setup change or something and we found this great performance, or it's no, it's just, this is what I do, this is my speciality. And it turned out that was kind of what it was, wasn't it? My speciality is riding on saving the tyres, not using the tyres up as much, and that allowed him to get into the top 10, which really he's been struggling to do ever since getting on the KTM, hasn't he?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, they've certainly got a lot of work to do. I mean, this wasn't a great event for them last year. Let's see what they do at the next few tracks. But yeah, at a time when the Japanese manufacturers, especially, certainly the Honda guys, when I asked them this evening, they think they can aim for best of the rest after Ducati. Ducati, obviously, in a league of their own, but they do feel they've closed the gap, and they can sort of challenge for best of the rest behind them. But yeah, KTM catching up to do really, and having had the test as well, that's the worrying thing, isn't it? They've had a 2-day test, loads of data there. They've had over a week to go through it all, try and find a solution, and it seems like the tyre wear issue that was there, right at the tests, still here we are on Sunday of the Thai Grand Prix, and it was still an issue.
Yeah. We touched on Honda and Yamaha there, Pete. Lewis, what do you take of the weekend? Do you know what? Really nice to see Joan Mir up there, albeit crashed in the Grand Prix, but got a point yesterday in the sprint. All the Hondas weren't at the back, essentially, and they look competitive. The only thing they're lacking is top speed, really, when you see it visually on TV. It's definitely good, isn't it? And Yamaha, maybe Jack Miller was definitely the leading light there. He as Quattararo said, Miller can take his brain out in qualifying and do those great laps, and it's good to have someone like that. But I think the Japanese manufacturers, Pete says, they've really made a step, haven't they?
Yeah, I'll start with Honda. I mean, I think you look at the Grand Prix last year in Thailand, and that was their best result of the year, 8th in a wet race. They've started the year with 7th. And really the only crash in front of them was Pedro Acosta. Had that not happened, they were finishing exactly where they left off in Thailand. But, Luca Marini reckons they've found about 4/10 per lap compared to last year in terms of pace. Mir all weekend, like that 1 lap pace is really, really strong on that Honda. He was top 6 there. He was in Friday, the practice analysis, the pace there was to kind of be in that top 6 as well. And unfortunately, he didn't get a chance to show that because he had to take a void in action of Marco Bezzecchi having a big wheel spin moment off the line. But the way he recovered from that was really good. Maybe last year it may have been in that position, having to push to try and recover ground. He would have crashed, because that's what the Honda kind of really did, was that if you pushed it too much, it would just crash. Clearly there are issues. He says, and has said all winter, there are a few weak points, but they're quite big. That's the problem there, and the key one really is the engine. They're still lacking in that traction area, but the bike's more agile, that they can make up for it. In these hotter conditions, all the Honda riders have said, yeah, the bike's pretty bad for whatever reason. Mir's crash in the Grand Prix was because it was so hot in those slow corners that he was really kind of getting burned by the bike, and he just made a mistake, and it happens. But overall, just the fact that we saw that pace in testing, and it has carried on, and I think there was maybe an expectation that, okay, it was good in the test, but when we get to the race weekend, Honda will be more, they'll be in the points, but it'll be more towards the bottom portion of the points, and that wasn't really the case. All the Hondas, barring Chantro being a rookie, we're all pretty competitive. Mir was up there, Zarco was up there, Marini needs some more to get on terms there, but the pace, when Joan Mir says they can be best the rest, the pace does kind of back that up. This is not one of the better circuits for the Honda, so if we start going to places like Jerez, for example, I'm expecting really, really big things there from Joan Mir especially, and Zarco as well. Yamaha, I think, harder to read. Jack Miller, I think, is just enjoying the fact he's on a bike that he can push. And I think that's where a lot of that speed comes from. Not to take anything away from Yamaha, I think the bike has made a step forward. Quartararo didn't have a great weekend, but he's struggled with the tyres all weekend. But, could that just be the tyres? It is a stiffer carcass here in Thailand because of the heat. And that typically doesn't really suit the Yamaha very much. So I don't quite think we've seen the full Yamaha picture yet. Because Alex Rins wasn't great, Miguel Oliveira weren't great, but they haven't really been great for a while. Let's be brutally honest about that. So yeah, I think Honda probably start the season a half step ahead of Yamaha at this point. But let's see when we get to more normal circuits where people like Miller and Quartararo and the real strengths of that Yamaha can kind of come out and see there. But I think, yeah, the steps that they've made in testing both of those manufacturers have proven to be genuine, which I think is probably the best news from this race.
Yeah, definitely. Well, to be fair, Alex Rins, Pete, the photo you posted on social media of his leg from the burns, really nasty looking. I mean, it was a story from a lot of people over the weekend that get burnt by their bikes, and Lewis touched on with Mir essentially crashing in the slower corners because the bike was so warm, and it's like, it's an odd case this weekend because it was so hot. Excited to see what they can do at tracks coming up, because I think about it, really, Austin should be a good track for both, really. So I think Argentina, like I say, it's always a tough one because it's always so dirty, and it's a bit weird. It's like Aragon last year with Marquez, that dirty track, and it throws up certain results. I think Austin should be a good marker for both, and if they're saying, especially Mir, around being the best of the rest, it's a good thing, isn't it, Pete?
Definitely, it's definitely a clear step from where they've been the last couple of years, isn't it? Yeah, definitely. I think Jack Miller's performance, we were quite surprised by him in testing, weren't we, after a pretty horrendous year last year on the KTM, and to be, coming out, okay, Barcelona test, that wasn't great, but, coming out from the start of the Sepang test this year and being sort of challenging Quartararo for top Yamaha was above our expectations. And then now he's gone and finished as the top Yamaha in the race, even though the fairing was loose and he was holding it in with his arms on the straights and everything else. And yeah, he had big marks on the inside of his arms from the fairing, and as well as the heat from it burning. It was a strange one with the heat. It's a good point you raised there, because it's almost so personal to some riders and some bikes, and some people are saying no. It was hot for everyone. Let's be clear. But some riders were saying it was okay, and others are saying, it was like hell, and they're showing off all these burns on their arms and legs. It's everyone deals with it differently, but definitely there's certain things that Digi didn't want to say. Digi obviously retired from the sprint, we should say, didn't we? Because of the heat on the Ducati, so he couldn't even do a half distance because of the heat that was coming from it. Really strange when the other Ducatis didn't seem to have that issue. Now, they didn't want to say what they can work with, but presumably they can play with some of the ventilation somehow on the bike. His leather suit. Of course, he missed testing, so he missed riding a lot in the heat as well. So maybe these are other things that they could have somehow improved for him. But yeah, he did sort of say, look, if you look at the pictures closely, you'll see that we were. I used the word artistic with some of the solutions that they found, but he got to the end today without too much trouble. But the Aprilia, I think, as you guys have raised already, was the biggest surprise, given that this was a bike where people were literally pulling in and stopping because it was so hot. And Ogura looked completely fresh. I mean, unbelievable. Probably the freshest of any rider on the grid that I saw today after finishing the race. Absolutely, barely sweating. And that also shows, I think, the smoothness and the skill and the lack of sort of mental energy that he's using to ride the MotoGP bike. It's coming naturally. This wasn't someone who's forcing a bike around, for 26 laps because he'd have been in much worse shape. This is somebody who's already quite at one with the bike and clearly not fighting it. And, that's good for him. But yeah, there's certainly a lot of people that were suffering with the heat today. The Hondas, as you guys have said, the Yamahas as well. I think with Yamaha, the front tyre seems to be the issue. It's one of these things that they rely so much on the front for performance. Mm-hmm. That's great until it starts dropping away. And then they struggle to maintain the pace. Jack Miller was able to sort of keep it going, but it seems like certainly for Alex Rins, and I think Oliveira as well, it's, Oliveira was quite good at explaining it. He said there's a trouble when you have a clear good point. When you're not able to use that good point, you struggle. And so that's kind of what you see. The front end of the Yamaha is great. They all say it. But when you can't use the front end, you can't make the lap time. And I think we've said it before, but, not many people say the front of the Ducati is great because it's all about using the rear. And so it does make you wonder a bit. I tried to ask Alex Rins about this today, but, do you think the Yamaha still needs to go more towards using the rear? Is it too front dependent? Because we know the rear is obviously the stronger of the Michelin tyres in performance-wise, front to back. So I don't know. He said, look, we're not sure. But definitely that was their kind of issue today. Once that front tyre wear kicked in, they just couldn't do the lap times that they could do, let's say, normal.
Yeah. Yeah, like we've covered everything, to be honest. I think all manufacturers have got really. Do you know what? Ducati and then best of the rest. Like, I think that's the way you can look at it now. And it's good for the championship in one sense that everyone's closing up. But yeah, I can't wait to see the next few rounds because I think, will it suit certain rider on a certain bike or I think it's going to be very interesting in that side. And just to come on to Ogura looking very cool after right in the heat. Alex, who works with us, said it's his training from Asia Talent Cup days at Suzuka in the summer. Anything, it's a breeze apparently because the humidity is really high there. So Ogura's cool in that sense. So yeah, I think we covered everything, gents. Summarize it: Marc Marquez back to Marc Marquez ways, essentially. Let's see what round 2 brings. If you enjoyed the podcast, make sure to like and subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, tell us who you thought was rider of the weekend on YouTube comments. Always interested in reading those. If you're listening on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, hit the bell icon. You'll be notified every time there's a new episode. Give us a 5-star review. And Argentina's up next. We'll see you then.